Hello there, epic fantasy fans. I'm Stacy Bennett. I write fantasy books. I thought today would be fun to sort of just give you a little snippet of my book, Quest of the Dreamwalker. There you go. It's on sale on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and you can also get it on Audible, which is a lot of fun if you have a lot of driving to do, which is kind of my life. I do a lot of Audible listening. And yes, I do believe listening on Audible counts as a book read, even though you didn't actually hold the book. I think that's the only fair way to do it. But anyway, so the setup is that Cara, the main character, is a woman who has magic power, and she's been kidnapped by a sorcerer who uses her power to support his own for her whole life. So she's never been outside the castle. At some point, she runs into Captain Khoury and Archer, and they help her escape. As they go about their travels, the sorcerer Sidonius is trying to catch them, and they end up in a place called Foresthaven, which is populated by huntresses, and there are no men in this culture. So what happens is when guys stumble into Foresthaven, they get killed. So I just thought I'd give you a quick introduction to Falin. We're going to read the first chapter we really see her in. And yeah, let's just get started. It's a short chapter, but let's meet one of my favorite characters in the book. Okay. After watching Rebecca's scouting party put the strangers in the prisoner's hut, Falin grabbed her bow and padded into the forest to hunt. She wondered if she'd have spared the outsiders' lives had she found them first. A wry grin twisted her lips. Probably not. She didn't need that kind of complication. Rebecca, on the other hand, had reputation to spare, and probably thought a public culling would increase her standing with the elders. Even with Chief Scout under her belt, Rebecca was still currying favor. Mother's love she'd be vying for a seat on the council next. Regardless, the men would be dead by morning. Not that Falin cared either way. They weren't her problem. When she returned with a few fat rabbits strung across her shoulder, Rebecca accosted her the moment she stepped into the clearing. The High Priestess wants to see you. I'll see her when I've eaten, Falin said, avoiding Rebecca's eyes. The scout's imperious tone never failed to stir Falin's insolence. No, now, Rebecca's face reddened. You'll go, and mind your manners, Dandelion. She spat the nickname like a curse, referring to Falin's yellow hair. She is the High Priestess, not some thornless hunter like you. Refusing to rise to the bait, Falin walked away, waving her hand dismissively. She enjoyed flaunting Rebecca's inability to force respect from her. All the same, Falin turned her step to Sorchia's, catch still in hand. The High Priestess had always been kind to Falin. In fact, it had been her decision to adopt the blonde outsider orphan all those years ago. Falin approached the hill, undoing her braid one-handed. Then, with the rabbits dangling from a leather thong between her teeth, she quickly combed her hair with her fingers and knotted it again. She wiped most of the dirt and blood from her tunic and sauntered in. Well, hello, Sorchia said, not turning from the steaming pot over the fire. Priestess Sorchia, Falin said, placing her hand over her heart and bowing deeply with respect and love. A gift of rabbits, she boasted. My favorite, as you well know. Sorchia peered intently at Falin. Is this a bribe for some as yet undiscovered crime? Sorchia, you wound me. I walk the straight and narrow every day, Falin said with a knowing smile. Sorchia snorted with skepticism. As you say. Why don't you clean them for us to share? I have something to ask you. Falin chuckled as she threw a leg over the bench and dropped the carcasses on the seat in front of her. Sorchia raised an eyebrow. Is something amusing? When you busy me with kitchen work, I know you're going to say something I don't like. Falin bent to her task, wielding her knife with sure, sharp cuts. Sorchia smiled wordlessly. I'm right, aren't I? Falin's green eyes twinkled. Perhaps it will be happy news. Oh, mother's love, now I know it's bad. All right, out with it. Don't wait and ruin my dinner. Falin stripped the skins and stopped to stare expectantly at the older woman. I do have a job for someone. You might actually want it. Liar. Sorchia sighed, the smile dropping from her weathered lips. You're restless, daughter. That's nothing new, Falin sobered, chafing at the unseen chains that held her. My feet were born to roam. She sliced the bellies and swept the innards onto a cloth on the floor, and then hacked the meat into sections with vehemence. Gathering the chunks in her hands, she walked over to the shallow pan, dumped the pieces in, and pushed it into the hottest part of the fire, where the meat sizzled angrily. You know the elders will never let me beyond the gates. I know, and I supported that restriction in the past. You were not ready. Not wanting to hear another lecture about her failings, Falin plopped back down on the bench. She didn't want to argue with Sorchia again, but the raw burn of injustice pressed at her. They don't even trust me enough to let me fight as a mercenary. It's ridiculous. I could be useful. Sorchia looked at her with motherly disapproval. You are useful. Here. Trapped between her pride and a huntress's duty, the burn bubbled over. Catching rabbits every night? Any weanling pup can do that. I'm wasting my time. Falin angrily drove her knife point down into the bench. As Sorchia nodded to herself, Falin realized she had revealed too much. The priestess took on her teaching tone as she rearranged the rabbit in the fry pan. We don't seek to elevate ourselves above our sisters, do we? No, Falin murmured, pushing down an angry retort about Rebecca's faults. And even if we go beyond the thorn gates, we must remain true to our mothers in all things. Ever a huntress. It was the proper answer. And that's what I want to know, Falin. Are you one of us? Falin paused. Was she one of them? She used to think it a stupid question, but now? I would have been, she whispered with all my heart. It was all she'd ever wanted until last summer. Sorchia sighed and relaxed. Whatever answer the old woman was looking for, she's found, although Falin still couldn't sense which way the wind was blowing. I didn't agree with that decision, the older woman said. They were wrong to overlook you. Falin looked up to see Sorchia's eyes mist with sadness. She plucked her knife from the bench angrily. She didn't want Sorchia's pity. Pity was for the weak. Their loss, Falin tossed out on a careless huff of breath, her armor once more in place. And my gain. Sorchia stirred the rabbit again, and then checked the stew pot before she sat on the bench and laid a hand on Falin's arm. I believe, my fierce one, that only you can help me with my plan. Plan? A very sensitive matter has just come to my attention. The strangers? Now it was getting interesting. How did you know about that? One of Rebecca's new bloods sounded the horn. Ah, and of course you went to help. Of course! Falin's smile was ferocious. Then you've met them. I saw them. No more than that. Rebecca doesn't share with me. No more than you share with her. True. Sorchia was always even-handed in her criticism of the two women, though Falin had never revealed the cruel depths of the lifelong feud between Rebecca and her. A feud which had come to a head at the summer solstice, when Rebecca was chosen as chief scout. Falin had worked hard to earn the right, and she was the better scout, but her uncompromising nature had won her more enemies than friends. Being passed over irked her like an itch she couldn't scratch. I've spoken with the white-haired girl, Sorchia continued. She may be young, but she will grow into a power the likes of which we've not seen since the mothers. That snip of a mouse tail? She's afraid of her own shadow. Nevertheless, the mothers have shown her to me in dreams. They want her to claim her destiny. The priestess gently shook Falin's arm for emphasis. And she can lead you to your own. Falin yanked her arm away. Lead me, the meek little rabbit. Sorchia sighed. Don't be deceived by appearances, proud one. All the same, she will need your strength or she won't survive. Falin sniffed with scorn. Still, despite her sharp words, she remembered the strange sympathy that had washed over her. Okay, she relented. So I'm to help the girl. And the men. The men? Yes. What about the culling? Sorchia shook her head. She will need the men, too. The priestess's eyes bored into Falin's, as if offering something unspoken. You're not telling the other elders about them? No. The hard words set Sorchia's jaw on edge. Unfailingly forthright, Falin had never known Sorchia to lie to the other elders. The truth of what Sorchia was asking made Falin's heart pound. And so, Sorchia continued, her gaze wandering down to her hands, your part in this won't be discussed. When you leave, they will certainly be upset. I think I finally deserted, Falin thought. Sorchia waited in silence, letting the huntress come to her own conclusions. I'd be banished, forbidden to return. Falin surveyed her possibilities. If she refused to help and stayed with Rebecca and this council, she'd always be the outsider, a lowly hunter forever. But if she left with the strangers, she couldn't begin to guess where she'd end up. New lands sparkled in her imagination. If I go, I'd be leaving for good, Falin said, making sure she understood. Sorchia chuckled softly and embraced her, something she hadn't done since Falin was small. The huntress felt some desperation in the gesture. Only do this if it's what you want, Falin, Sorchia whispered. Oh, I want this. Excitement coursed through Falin. I'll do whatever you ask. Sorchia drew back, chagrined at Falin's enthusiasm. You must lead the strangers, all of them, through the thorn gates. Her voice was little more than a whisper. The elders won't look kindly on this, so you should go in secret before sunrise. Secret? But Rebecca and her scouts already know. The last thing Falin wanted was to leave Sorchia in shame. You must perform a false culling, Sorchia whispered, as if even though she said them supposedly with the mother's blessing, the words were a sin. Falin's heart hammered at the thought of such dangerous subterfuge. She was not as devout as most, but if they caught her lighting a false culling, they'd slit her throat right there and scatter her ashes in the outlands. Betrayal and blasphemy would be Falin's legacy. Rebecca won't agree to this. Let me handle Rebecca. She's devoted to the mothers. Falin didn't agree about Rebecca's devotion, but soon it wouldn't matter. Where exactly do they need to go, these strangers? Lead them south. Use the guide's prayer if the thorns get restless. Make sure Cara gets to Yolair safely. Yolair. South of the White Mountains, then east to the pass. It was a long way, far past the thorns, and a smile lifted Falin's lips. I promise they'll reach Yolair, she said, already going over in her mind all she needed to do before morning. Sorchia surprised Falin with a sniffle and rose from the bench, her face in shadow. She puttered to the hearth and cleared her throat with a cough. Well, now that that's settled, I'm starving. Sorchia stirred the rabbit until it was cooked through and then dumped the meat into the vegetable stew as Falin grabbed 2 clay bowls from a shelf. She filled them with the fragrant stew and handed one to Sorchia along with a spoon. The 2 women sat on the bench eating the savory meal, each lost in her own thoughts, until Falin realized she didn't want to leave the priestess with this awkwardness between them. She put down her bowl and fetched the wineskin from the pantry. Pouring the deep purple liquid into 2 goblets, she shared the bittersweet blackthorn wine with the priestess, and then began regaling Sorchia with tales of shame from that morning's sparring, and idle gossip from the smithy. Sorchia recounted familiar tales of what a terror Falin had been as a child. They ate their dinner of rabbit and hornuts with laughter. It was a good last meal together. When Falin left, it was with a lingering hug for the only mother she'd ever known. But the outside world beckoned, and Falin wasn't about to turn it down. So as you see, Falin is going to help Cara and her men through Foresthaven and on to Yolair. Things don't get easier after that, but I'll let you read to find out the rest. Again, Quest of the Dreamwalker by Stacey Bennett. is available on Amazon and Audible. Thanks again for sharing part of your weekend with me, and I hope you guys have a great Valentine's Day.